Hello, I seem to be getting some positive feedback about these David Kossoff stories. I've done two now, so if you haven't heard any of the others, there are two online to already look at. This is the third, taken from David Kossoff's book of Witnesses. This story is about the young man whose father owned the upper room that the disciples were told to get ready for. So as we're in the season of Lent, moving ever nearer to Easter, even though perhaps it doesn't feel like it because we're not able to go to church, perhaps this helps as our preparation for what will still be most definitely Holy Week. So I hope that you enjoy Benjamin's story. This is Benjamin. For quite a long time now, I thought my brother would get into trouble for letting the carpenter and the 12 eat their Passover supper upstairs. The way things turned out, I mean, with the carpenter being arrested that same night and executed the next day, sailing very close to the wind that was. My brother's like that. He's not afraid of anything. He's the strong one. He tells me what to do and, well, I just do it. He looks after me, you see. He brought me up pretty well after my dad died. He's nearly 8 years older than I am. He's not really a follower of Jesus. He owed him a debt. You see, Sharon, my brother's wife, she were very ill. She were dying. And no one could do anything. No one knew exactly what it was. But about 2 years ago, Jesus put his hand on her head and told her she were going to get well. And she did in 2 days. And my brother told Jesus that that big room upstairs were his whenever he needed it and for whatever purpose. For holding meetings or for hiding in if things got hot. My brother knows how things can go in this city. In Jerusalem, things can get hot, especially if you run foul of that temple lot or Governor Pilate. Well, I'm told Jesus did both. I only met Jesus once, really, to talk to, on the night of that supper upstairs. It were nearly a year ago. It'll soon be Passover again. I like Passover. It's such a happy time. The night of suppers for the first nights when the freedom from slavery story is told all over again. The supper upstairs, though, wasn't a happy one last year. It were all a bit strange. The whole day was odd, if I'm honest. At breakfast, my brother told me to clean the big room and to put the long table up. I asked him who for and were we going to have a Passover party, and he said no. He said the carpenter and the 12 were coming. Well, I was surprised because Jesus had made no use of that room. When did you hear from him? I said. Never you mind, said my brother. Sharon were pleased, and she got busy cooking, getting all the big bowls out, making bread without salt, unleavened. About midday, my brother told me to take a big water jar and go to the market and fill it. Well, that were really odd. I mean, we have our own well back in garden. I was going to ask why, but sometimes with him it's best not to. My brother usually has a good reason, and the market's not far, and the melon woman's by the well, and I like melon. Well, I bought some melon and I was sat in the sun whilst I ate it. And then I picked up the jug and I started back, and 2 men started to follow me. Both big, strong-looking men. It were obvious. They weren't making a secret of it. I tried to shake them off because I were a bit scared, but I couldn't. So I came home so that my brother could handle it. As I got to our door, they came right up and stood on either side of me, both looking down at me and smiling. The larger one put his hand on my shoulder, and then my brother opened the door and greeted them by name, Peter and John. It were 2 of the 12. Peter, the one with his hand on my shoulder, said he had a message from his master, and we went inside. I took the water up to the room, and after a minute or two they came up with my brother to see the room, and then they left. I went on sorting stuff out and helping Sharon with the cooking, and in the late afternoon they all arrived together just as the sun were going down. Just as we'd finished the preparations. Well, they stayed downstairs for a bit, and I served them with wine and nuts and dates, and Sharon came in wearing a new Passover dress, and they were really nice to her, and the carpenter asked how she was keeping. She looked really pretty. They were very strange assortment of men. About the only thing they had in common was the Galilee accent, except one. He was dark, rather tense-looking man called Judas, and he didn't smile at all. My brother told me that Judas came from far south, from Kerioth, and that his name Iscariot meant man of Kerioth. I just didn't warm to him somehow. 2 of the 12 were cousins of the carpenter. There were 2 pairs of brothers, all fishermen. They were all rough sort of men. Even the one Sharon said had been a tax collector. She said one of them, who was quick and fiery, was a nationalist, anti-Roman, a revolutionary. There were 2 called James, one a cheerful little fella. The biggest of the 12 was Peter. His brother Andrew was like him, but not as tall or heavy, and he was the quietest. I suppose, though, the quietest of them all that night was Jesus. He seemed to listen more than he spoke, and he seemed rather sad. Not very Passover-ish, as I like to call it. When I asked Simon if she and my brother and I were also going to eat upstairs in the big room, she said we'd not been invited. We were to have our own Passover supper downstairs with some family as usual, but I had to help a little upstairs with the serving and taking up of food and so on. Then, when the sun had gone nearly down, Jesus stood up. He seemed ever so tired. Everyone stopped talking and he led the way upstairs. It seemed to be a very solemn Passover. After a few minutes, my brother told me to go up and make sure they had enough water and towels for the hand washing before food. When I went in, it was feet that were being washed. Jesus, the chief one, the head of them all, was on his knees in front of Peter, washing his feet and drying them on a towel. He'd already done about half the 12. They were all sat there with clean feet. It was most odd, but all rather serious. The 12 all seemed a bit embarrassed, except Judas, who was scowling and looking angry. I went down and brought up more water and some fresh towels, and when I offered to help, Jesus smiled and said no, and Judas gestured with his head for me to go. Our own supper downstairs was, as always, on Passover, very happy, lots of songs and wine, and every now and then I'd go up to the big room with big dishes of each course for them to serve themselves, but they didn't seem to be enjoying themselves very much, certainly not as much as we were downstairs. There were no songs. The second time I was up, they were just finishing the dish of savoury dip that Sharon makes for Passover. You dip bits of bread in it to give you a Happy New Year. As I walked in, about 4 of them were dipping, and Jesus was saying, in a calm sort of way, one of you is going to betray me. They all looked at him with their mouths open. I felt very out of place, and I left immediately, and as I got to the bottom of the stairs, I heard the door of the room upstairs open and shut, and then Judas came running down. He was in such a hurry, he nearly pushed me over, although I don't think he even saw me. He looked terrified, sort of guilty. He rushed straight past into the street and up the road. I told my brother, and he said it were none of our business, and I should take up a flask of our best wine with his compliments. Well, I wasn't keen, but I left it a bit, and then I took it up with the meat, the Passover lamb. I was almost afraid to open the door, and when I did, the carpenter was on his feet breaking pieces of a new loaf and passing them among his friends. Eat, he said, in memory of me, in memory of my body. Then he saw me and he said, we'll drink good wine, and it will also be in memory of me, and my blood which is soon to be shed for you. I poured the wine in absolute silence. Jesus drank his and said, I'll drink no more until I drink it with you all in my Father's kingdom. I thought he meant his dad must be a king and he was a prince going home, but he didn't look like a prince. And as I went out, they were beginning to sing a hymn, but it was a very sad one, not a Passover song at all. Well, the last time I went up was to ask if they needed anything else, and to take up some of Sharon's cinnamon and almond cakes. I knocked, but there seemed to be a lot of raised voices, and I wasn't heard. So after a moment I tiptoed in. Most of them were on their feet, all talking and protesting at once. The carpenter was in the middle, and then he spoke without raising his voice at all. He said, it's written in the scriptures, you will all lose faith in me. All of you. Then the noise started again, and the big man, Peter, spoke the loudest. "Not me," he said, "not me, even if all the others do, not me." And Jesus spoke again. "I tell you, Peter," he said, "that before the cock crows tomorrow morning, you'll have denied you even know me 3 times. The big man could hardly speak. I put down the little cakes and went downstairs, and not long after they all came down. Jesus thanked my brother and Sharon, and they all went out into the dark. They were very quiet, not in the least like they'd been to a Passover party. I went back up to the room and started to clear up, and do you know, those little cinnamon cakes were just where I'd put them, untouched."